a little bit of a time change this week. So maybe you've had your lunch, maybe you got your lunch, and you're multitasking, maybe you're making lunch and listening. That's the cool thing about webinars. You could just set that laptop on the kitchen counter. I do that while I'm washing dishes sometimes, just I can listen. So no worries, however you're listening, as long as you are listening. Thank you for joining. And it looks like everyone's in. I'm just going to go ahead and admit this one other person. And hello, good afternoon. Seeing a few new names, so that's cool. Seeing old friends, also excellent. And yeah, let's get started. Where are we this week, right? Well, let me just share my screen. Welcome to session 10, UC Personal Insight question 4, plus some rapid response news for you guys. I first just wanted to note just, what's going on in the world, because when students are writing their essays or when they're, again, thinking about how they're going to be positioning themselves for top school admissions, you want to be responding to the times. So I think it's just interesting this week how things seem to be settling down a little bit, sorting themselves out a little bit, resolving themselves. We're seeing statues coming down. We're seeing the NFL apologizing to players. We're hearing about all sorts of discussions of what is defund the police, what is demilitarize the police, reform the police. What's the difference between these phrases? We're asking about the definitions of things in our cultural landscape. And that's a really important, exciting moment. I see it as a moment of renewal. And I believe I've told you guys, I've revealed to you guys that I used to be a scholar in ancient Greek philosophy. I've talked to you about Aristotle, but I must admit that Plato and Socrates are closest to my heart. I wrote my dissertation on Plato, and I wrote my dissertation on sort of an esoteric dialogue that was exploring the difference between truth and falsity, which is one of Plato's main projects. And Socrates talks about what he calls the search for definitions, and the way in which the search for definitions is the most monumental thing that we can do as humans, is to try and, come to common ground with each other about what things mean. So if you are witnessing or experiencing, maybe some tension around defund, demilitarize, reform, all the things that are going down in our culture, I think it's helpful to see this as a time of renewal, when things are put into question and things get redefined, hopefully in a way that meets up with the times. So the sorting out of definitions, and sometimes you're going to have to do that if you're a student writing your essays and explaining, what you mean by a term or by a theme or a thesis that you're working through in your essay. So I also wanted to say that when our students are now working through their free write questionnaires, so we're in the free write stage right now of essay writing, and we work in Google Docs. And so when students make comments, sometimes I'm notified that these comments are being made. And I happened to dip into an email notification I got yesterday where a student was commenting on her own free write submission in the free write questionnaire. And she wrote a comment and it said, "Oh my, I sound like X." I don't want to say what she said she sounded like. Because it's a personal matter, her free write questionnaire, but she's like, "I sound like this kind of person." And I found that I just really chuckled to myself, because what I saw in that moment when she made a comment on her own writing was self-reflection. And so much of this essay writing that we do with our teens is an exercise in self-reflection. And this is the big personal growth piece that teens are faced with in admissions essay writing. So teens often feel like they can write up a little report of what they did, say where they're really proud at the end, and they have a good essay. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily meet the expectations of admissions readers. And to get that extra piece in the essay, you really do have to start to learn some self-reflection. And so I really appreciated that she could just use, a comment to comment on her own, on her own free writing. And also, another tip I hadn't planned on sharing with you, but this is a really, really good tip. We talk about this with our students once we're in the revision stage is once she became self-reflective, she became a little less attached to what she wrote, and she could look at it with, scrutiny. And so, there's this famous phrase among writers that, when it comes to revision, you have to kill your darlings or kill your babies. It's a very common phrase. And so her being able to separate herself and look at just the drafting, just the free write, is readying her for that next stage as well, the revision stage. So I just wanted to share a few observations. These webinars are really giving me an interesting opportunity myself to reflect, and oftentimes something is happening during the week. I'm like, I want to remember to tell people this. So anyway, that the free write in a way that you can then comment on your own work, it's a very healthy and pivotal personal growth exercise. So here we are, here I am. This week did actually mark the 10th anniversary this past Wednesday, and I think you guys got an email from me about that, so really excited about that. Feels really good. Feels like we've got some amazing solid work behind us and a great foundation for moving forward, and I'm really excited about that. I do want to note that the free college planning workbook, there was a glitch there, but we have fixed it, so it is available to be downloaded again. So I want to let you guys know about that. Here's the awesome team. We are still accepting students, so if you are interested, please write me or write info@Blue Stars. And I'm so very pleased to announce our 10th anniversary celebration. It'll be Sunday, June 28th. So yes, I still will be doing a webinar on the personal insight question on 27th. So it's going to be like a double feature weekend. And as you can see, there's Hejin, the very first student to sign on to Blue Stars. And then there's Roger from my Ohio days. So it's going to be, I think, a really incredible reunion. Come with questions. These two people are just amazing, amazing human beings. So all I can say is I hope I don't cry throughout the whole thing. But I'm really, really looking forward to that, and I hope you join me. Okay, we've got not a ton of new news, things that I think like the universities are just sort of hunkering down and waiting to see how things are developing and creating their contingency plans. So we'll have lots of time to talk about question 4 today. And I'm psyched for the wisdom. I have writing wisdom today. Let's go forward. Let's just leave that week behind and just take all that great stuff, all of that renewal, all the transformational stuff that's going on around us, all the stuff that's stopping us, whatever for now, who cares? Let's soak up some new energy. Let's get started. Okay, so just a quote from article from the U.S. News and World Report. Although a rolling survey by the Chronicle of Higher Education suggests that nearly 70% of schools are planning for on-campus education, almost every institution directly contacted by Kaiser Health News was actually planning for all contingencies with fully or partly open campuses simply being the best case and most publicly touted scenarios. So we talked about this last week with, going into a little bit more detail with what's going on at Stanford, but I just wanted to, again, mark a place for this, that universities are still in this, I think, very dynamic, active pattern of making sure they have a number of plans in place, and then a holding pattern because they can't choose one yet. And we can expect that most campuses will end the semester by Thanksgiving because they're not going to want the travel back and forth. So that's what I got for that. Brown and Johns Hopkins are now test optional. Okay. So again, it's touch and go with the test centers and testing. And I know there's a lot of anxiety around this. And I just know with the families we're working with that it's going to be an experiment this year. And so let's just keep hoping that students can take tests in the fall. If not, there might be ways for them to show Khan Academy tests, practice exams, maybe from if they're working with a tutoring company sort of thing, or just it might not factor into the equation for their admission story. And there'll be a lot that you can still do without, having that test. So it's really touch and go. And I just want to keep everybody, aware of the latest. And I do want to emphasize that admissions this coming year, it's not going to be easier or harder. It's not like there are not going to be a ton of deferrals and gap years and then students from this year sort of spilling into next year. Admissions offices they don't want to do that. They want to maintain the balance every year. So hopefully your summer activities are underway. You're creating your school list and you're doing that brainstorming and then maybe commenting on your own free writing, giving yourself some critical commentary. You're juggling, keeping your goals in mind. And now our freshmen and sophomores and your personal growth summers are underway. And if you still need some more ideas, you can check out session 5 on the COVID-19 playlist. Okay. You might want to map things all out in the timeline, and timelining is that last chapter in the college planning workbook. So I would check out the timeline. It's a good thing. I don't know why this is doing this. I'll go back here, sorry. Okay, well, here's the wisdom that I wanted to, I'm sort of surprise you with, something totally different. So this week I just wanted to give some writing wisdom. I mean, there's so much involved in applying to college, and I know we've talked, a lot of the wisdom I've shared is connected directly to admission. But this week, I just thought it'd be really helpful for teens to gain some wisdom just about writing. And as I've talked before, good writers don't just like spring out of the earth and write everything. It's great. They don't have breakdowns. They don't have crises of confidence. Yes, writers all the things that students are afraid to go through. Every writer goes through these things, So there's an element of courage, involved in writing. And anyway, this quote from Tori Amos, and maybe there are some parents in the audience today who know Tori, hopefully like her. I'm a big Tori Amos fan. And those of you who are not familiar with Tori Amos's work, she's a pop alternative type of artist. She is a master piano player. So those of you who are interested in the piano, I most definitely invite you to check out her work. So she recently came out with a book, A Songwriter's Story of Hope, Change, and Courage. She's been writing and performing since the late 80s. I really love this. So this is what she has to say. She says, what I wished another songwriter would have told me years and years ago is that your circumstances make up your story, and no one has exactly your story. It is your very own. You need never envy someone else's story, someone else's life story. I don't believe anyone's story is boring. Every story has value because it belongs only to you. It is the one true thing that does belong to you and that you can mine for emotional gold. Someone might try to belittle your story or make a joke about it or make you think that your history is worthless because there is a rating system applied to, so what's your story? But, and I truly mean this, that particular power play can work only if you allow yourself to believe in that nonsense. It's an attack move. I just wish someone had told me that when I was a teenager. So it's possible that teenagers will have wished that too. So I thought I really wanted to share that with you guys. And this idea that everyone's story has value, and don't let other people sort of knock your story down. And that's why when we go through free writing and when we work with our students on writing their essays, we don't share those documents with anybody, including parents. So when families sign up with us, they already know this, because you can't feel judged when you're telling your story. And what we do when we work with students, we are sort of judging the story based on how will it connect with an admissions reader, you know, a very particular kind of reader. But when we're in there in the free writes, it's a very vulnerable space, you know, and so what we're doing is getting excited about the hot spots, the cool pieces, getting students to sort of focus on those things, expand on those things, and honor their story. And also, again, I think I said this maybe in a previous session, but when, you know, this is a coming of age, a rite of passage for our teens, you know, and they're getting to know themselves in a new way. And that can be a very sensitive area. So, and that's why we really encourage parents not to talk about the essays with their children and allow their children to have that free space. So, you know, if getting a professional coach is beyond your means, finding maybe a cousin, you know, a niece, someone maybe who's closer in age, an extra person around, because if you feel judged when you're writing, that's a piece of the block. That's why students have a really hard time. They don't believe in their story. Of course, students, you have to start earlier too and get through all the bad stuff. That's been my line for the past few sessions, but that's Tori, and I hope you appreciate that. Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird. So this is very famous, and this is her book, Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing and Life. And this is the story that starts out the book. 30 years ago, my elder brother, who was 10 years old at the time, was trying to get a report written on birds that he'd had 3 months to write, which was due the next day. We were out at our family cabin in Bolinas, and he was at the kitchen table, close to tears, surrounded by binder paper and pencils and unopened books about birds, immobilized by the hugeness of the task ahead. Then my father sat down beside him, put his arms around my brother's shoulder and said, "Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird." So it's a classic story. And the advice is exactly right. It is exactly right. So what we do in the free write questionnaire is we just have a ton of different topics, and we tell students, you know, you could put the font in white, you can close your eyes, but for us it's word by word or memory by memory or impression by impression. And without judging yourself, just get it out and then walk away. go back the next day. Maybe you're doing the same thing for several days, maybe a couple of weeks, you know, and then you'll get curious about what you wrote. You're going to feel more relaxed about the stuff you wrote a while back. And, you know, with that attitude of curiosity, start reviewing the bad, crappy text you wrote. And then you move on. You keep, you know, again, bird by bird in that showing up, butt in chair. So that is my wisdom for you guys for this afternoon. That's the news that I have. And at this point, I believe it's time to grab Helen. So I have to find my video thing again. Here we go. Helen's here. Hi, Helen. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Are you ready to talk about personal insight? UC personal insight question number 4?
You bet.
Excellent. I can't wait. Cool. And as always, being very systematic, right? So being creative doesn't mean that you're not systematic, right? Being systematic, we're going to first talk about general tips for all the personal insight questions. So quick review, be specific. We can't emphasize that enough. Be specific. If your essay is specific and it's like not grammatically correct, you'll do well. You will still do well. If your essay is all grammatically correct, but it's not specific and it's really vague, you will not do as well. Okay, stay focused on one aspect or story. Include a takeaway or lesson learned. Don't get fancy. Expect to draft multiple revisions so you can work through those initial bad ideas. Avoid repeating topics or stories throughout the 4 essays. So spread your content throughout the 4 essays. And the more we get through these essays, the more we can talk about them. Also, in Q&A, feel free to ask us, like, what's the difference between this and this, you know? Revise for tone. And that's what that student was doing in her free write. She's like, oh, I sound like this. She caught her tone at the free write stage. So love it. All right. So now that we've got our general topics, let's check this prompt out. Try and move this around. Okay. Describe how you have taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity or worked to overcome an educational barrier you have faced. So, as you can tell from my fantastic graphic work here, the or is really, really important, right? This really is, in some ways, okay, we'll get creative later, but first, let's talk about this question as an either or question. So you wanna, and see how I color coded things. So you wanna pick one side or the other.
So if you want to write about the significant educational opportunity half, you could write about a summer research experience. You could write about an academic program, a selective program like Cosmos or SSP. You could write about an independent project you did. You could even write about a school class that had a big impact on you. Maybe there was something that you really learned in that class for the first time, or it kind of steered your life in a different direction. All of those would address the first half of the prompt.
I remember years back, this was not when we had the new essays, when the old essays, but it was very, she wrote something that was really appropriate here. And this is a student who went to Monte Vista in the South Bay, so very hard, very, very difficult school. And she had a really hard English teacher. I forget the name, but this woman plagued her like the whole year because she was used to writing for the grade. And this English teacher would not have it. So all the students who wrote just to please her, she would not give them good grades. She was teaching them how to really write. So this student decided, okay, if this is what this teacher's gonna tell me, I'm gonna learn that. And she did learn it. And she went from like a B- to an A, but that you know, she took advantage by learning a new way of being a student. So that was a really, really good one. For the taking advantage part. But if you want to tackle the educational barrier part, there's lots of different things you can do here too, for example. So if you came to the United States, from another country and started going to school here as a non-native speaker, this is the perfect opportunity for that kind of story. Or if you were struggling in a class and you couldn't get it, and you kept working through it and you raised your grade, you gained new insight into the class, or you gained an appreciation you might not have, that's also a really good topic for the educational barrier. We have another really good example that we're going to go through an example at the end that one of my favorites. So.
And I think we know that a lot of parents and students are sometimes nervous about this half of the UC4 because they perceive that they're being asked to write about a problem that they've had or a failure of some kind. But the way that you get around that is also noticed in the fancy graphics here, the worked to overcome part of this half, right? So what you really want to emphasize if you're going to pick this half of the prompt to address is not the problem itself, but how you dealt with the problem, what your reaction was to the problem. So you don't want to invest the problem with all the emotional energy in the essay. You want to talk about the problem, but the real emotional energy should go into how you dealt with the problem and what you did to overcome whatever problem there was.
Yeah, so when you have a challenge essay or a work to overcome essay, it's really easy, especially for teens, but for a lot of adults to get into the whole sob story. You're just like, you're reliving that terrible experience. And what happens is that most students often start writing about the bad experience. They sort of can't stop. And then the last 3 lines of the essay was how things got better. And I can just tell you that that's not a pleasant reading experience for someone who doesn't know. It might be cathartic for the student to get the story out like that. So right here, I just want to give you a really important, what I think this is like a gold, like a solid gold Blue Stars tip. So how do you write about hardship? Okay. So again, usually what we do is we have our students write the hardship story, like write the sob story, get it all out. But what you do is you create a structure to the essay. And perhaps some people are familiar with what we call the praise sandwich. When you're critiquing writing, you always start with something good, then you get into the critique, then you end with something good at the end. Similarly, with this kind of the hardship essay, you want to do like a happy sandwich or a triumph sandwich. So you start out having gone through, you're on the other side of the barrier, the other side of the hardship. Then you're like, oh, well, I wasn't always like this. It was really bad like 2 months ago or 3 years ago. And then the middle of the essay is the hardship part. And then you get into the how. So maybe even half, the last third or half of the essay is how you got yourself out of it. So it's sort of like a triumph sandwich or a happy sandwich. So just again, and that's why revisions are so important. So you can write the sob story draft first, and then you can go back and say, oh, let me give this thing structure so I don't assail my reader, which is, this was terrible, and that was terrible, and that was terrible, right? So you give them a proper sort of context and tone.
And again, I know that a lot of parents can be very nervous about this half of the prompt, but one of the major things that colleges look for is growth in a student or like new perceptions. It's tough to demonstrate that if everything in your life has always gone really well, if you've always been really good at something. So by taking on this half of the prompt, you really are able to demonstrate how you approach challenges and how you bounce back from them. So it's really a kind of a prompt that admissions committees value a lot. But there's also a kind of creative interpretation of this prompt where you could pick some experience or activity that was both a significant opportunity and that helped you overcome an educational barrier. So let's say, for example, maybe at your school, you were not eligible to take AP Computer Science at an earlier age. Maybe at your school, you have to have certain prerequisites to be an APCS. Maybe you have to be a junior or a senior because they have limited slots. That's your barrier, right? Maybe you want to take it earlier because you've got plans for doing more advanced computer science work. So in order to overcome that barrier, you apply to some kind of computer science program in the summer, right? That's your significant educational opportunity. You learned a lot about Java, you solved, machine learning or AI problems or something, and that allowed you to satisfy the prerequisite, and then you could enroll in the APCS course that you wanted to in the fall. That shows the effort that you made and the initiative that you took to overcome the barrier. So that encompasses both halves of the prompt. So it's possible to do both, but you're still focusing only on one event or one activity.
Right. So we started by saying it's either or, do one side or the other, because we want you to focus. We want you to be specific. And I might have said this before, but we try to tell our students, not they really, the angel is in the details, which is a spin on the devil is in the details. But nonetheless, you can, as long as it's the same story, you can talk about how, a crisis is opportunity, right? How a barrier did turn into an opportunity. So another example would be if you self-studied for an AP exam. Let's say we have a student who wants to double up on AP, like social sciences and languages, and is really upset that her high school, I won't say which one, will let the students double up on AP sciences, but not AP humanities and social sciences. So she's younger, so I don't know what she'll do. But let's say you took the AP Lit exam and you self-studied for it. Your school did not offer it, or it didn't offer it the year, maybe it offered it only in 12th grade, but you love Lit. So you either self-studied or maybe you got a tutor. So there's the barrier is that you weren't able to take the class. You turn that barrier into an opportunity. Maybe it's self-study. You went and took the exam. You have this appreciation of literature. You'll be able to take more, advanced classes once you get to college. You've already set your sights on being a world-renowned writer. Great space for this kind of story. We didn't emphasize this enough, and I didn't bold the how here, and my bad here, right? It's taken advantage or overcome. So never forgetting about that how part. Once you get into the how of your the details of your how, you're gonna have a good essay. Again, it doesn't even have to be grammatically totally correct. They just want to know about you. They really just want to know about you. Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good for some just general tips on personal insight question 4 at this point. Can we see that? Okay. Well, first of all, it's an either or question. So focus on either the first or second part of the question, unless you have one story that encompasses both. Okay, otherwise stick with one. Keep it simple, keep it simple. No reason not to keep it simple. So summer research, academic summer programs, independent projects, they work well for significant educational opportunity part. Raising your grade in a hard class, learning in a foreign language, excelling academically with a learning difference or lack of resources at your school work well for educational barrier. If barrier is your focus, that happy sandwich, the triumph sandwich, start the essay positively. Dip into the hardship story, end on a note of triumph. This is my solid gold tip for you today. Okay, educational, we have a good example of this. Educational is not confined to a formal academic experience, okay? It's possible that it could be something else, like an internship, volunteering, a special friendship, too. Oops, I don't want to go there yet. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the prompt here. All right, we're gonna talk about some examples now and come back to a slide that unifies everything. So, did you want to give us our first example, Helen?
Yeah, so we're going to try to present these examples in order of sort of like more traditional to more creative interpretations of what an educational experience might be. So our first example is student A, and he did sort of the more traditional UC4. He wrote that about a selective academic program that he attended, which was the Stanford Humanities Institute. He was applying to the UCs as a physics major. He already had great STEM experience to write about. He'd even done research at Stanford on black holes, so he had plenty to back up his interest in physics. But by adding this description of his interest in the humanities and writing about how his interest in the humanities developed and how he learned to see the interrelationships between STEM fields and the humanities and how they enhance each other and how that played an important role in his life, he ended up with a really interesting essay. And it actually also ended up forming the basis of his Common App essay for all of his Common App schools. And he got admitted to Berkeley in the UCs, but it also got him admitted to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So this is a pretty highly, competitive student and did really, really well. But what differentiated him as a STEM student was this other aspect, this other part of his character and his interests.
That was a jackpot moment with that student, and so many good stories. But what's important, I think, also to highlight, which you just did, Helen, is that this student who was very much a STEM student, and he's a physics major now at Harvard, he used this, take a significant educational opportunity to really open up his profile and show that he was, a scientist with a soul, definitely a scientist with a soul. And I definitely think that's a big piece of what made his candidacy so attractive. So that's a really, really good example. Okay, so I'm going to talk about student B. So student B chose to write about an internship she had with the Beijing Bureau of the New York Times. So this was not a formal classroom experience at all, not formal education. And in fact, a lot of the education that she got from the experience was also not formal. So what she did was she wrote, published, and she translated 2 of her articles into Chinese. So she learned about the publishing industry. She learned about the international journalism. But to her surprise, at least one of her articles got a lot of comments, a lot of commentary, and one can even say backlash. So she found herself in the middle of almost like a heated cultural discussion about Chinese American identity that she had to field. So this internship not just sort of introduced her to the profession, but it gave her this real world cultural moment that just taught her a lot about journalism, about the world, about international discussions of identity. And it was really quite profound for her. And it really also it enhanced her profile as a future English major. And she is now studying English at Stanford. So this was quite a compelling story.
And for those of you who wonder whether the essays matter, I always like the story that she told us about going to the new student orientation. And one of the Stanford admissions officers came over to her and said, "Oh, you're the one who wrote the essay about semicolons," because she had done that for one of her Stanford essays. So somebody identifies you by the essay you wrote, you probably did a pretty good job. So
maybe we'll do, like, when we do our panel later in the summer, we'll do like, what are the wildest essays we worked on with students, and the semicolon one.
Yeah. the kind of creativity Stanford looks for. So
definitely.
Okay, so we have another student, call him student C, who took sort of a really broad non-academic interpretation of the UC4. and wrote about his experience being selected as a counselor for an outdoor leadership training camp. He'd been going to this camp as a camper for a number of years and then applied to their leadership training program, which included things like endurance hikes with very little food and swimming across a lake in the middle of the night when you don't really know which night it's going to happen. And the guy who ran the camp will wake you up and say, okay, tonight is when you're going to swim across the lake at night. So his UC4 focused on what he learned about leadership and the wilderness survival skills he gained also, but also his own motivation and commitment to his own fitness, to kind of practice and gear up and go into training because he knew that this swim thing was going to happen. So he actually had to go into training with a neighbor who was an Olympic swimmer, I guess, years ago or something. But, you know, he learned a lot of different kinds of lessons. So it was a significant educational opportunity. It just wasn't an academic one. And he, again, was applying as a physics major. So this gave him a lot of differentiation in his
Yeah, because then he went on and took on all these leadership roles in high school, which he was starting to take some, but not really that sort of passionately, that actively. And I just remember, you know, hanging out with him after that summer, after he went, there was just there was wisdom. He had really matured just as a person so much from all of those experiences. And again, not a formal educational type thing, but a major monumental learning experience. And this student received an amazing scholarship from Oberlin this year as well. So again, the subject matter as a response to this question can be used, you know, for other essays too, and be equally impressive. So, okay. Well, I'm going to talk about our last example, the second half, the worked to overcome an educational barrier that you faced. And this is a student from Mexico, and she told the story of going to an overcrowded public school, and she was invited to apply to a prestigious private school to go to. But the tuition was 4 times her mother's salary. She was just a little girl. She didn't know what to do, but she decided, I want to take this exam. I want to take the entrance exam anyway. She was so hungry for like the proper education for her. So she asked a family friend for the bus money, and she took a bus to the nearby town, took the test, and she received a full ride to that school. And even when her parents moved to the United States, she stayed in Mexico. She lived with her grandmother. They didn't have a whole lot of food. She walked every day, 2 hours back and forth to school in the heat. And she ultimately moved here to the States. There were more educational barriers with the student. It's a true story. I know the student, very close with the student. When she got to the United States, there were all sorts of other barriers in her way. I started working with her on her, she was a community college student at the time, working with her on her UC applications. And she just graduated from UC, and she got a full ride to go to UC. And in fact, she's an artist as well as a storyteller. California College of the Arts and Berkeley, they were like fighting over her. So that was an interesting moment as well. So a very poignant educational barrier story. So, okay, we've got 4 examples for you. And now let's just put this all together. Got our tips for personal insight question 4. So we can see that student A took advantage of a humanities summer program to broaden his horizons beyond STEM. So you see how his answer really served a key purpose in his UC application. Student B took advantage of a real-world international journalism opportunity that really taught her a lot about the real world, not just professional practices, but what it's like when people respond to your writing in an intercultural context. Student C took advantage of a wilderness leadership experience that taught him much more than swimming across a lake. And student D overcame socioeconomic barriers to an elite education as a child in Mexico. So I hope that provides you guys with lots of different ideas for this essay. I keep forgetting to send you all the resources, but I now have it on my mind. I've got 2 more. I've got just something on Anne Lamott and just the US News. There isn't a ton of new news right now. And I think we're ready for a Q&A at this point. So while you guys are gathering your thoughts, I'm gonna look here and chat on this question. And I don't know, Helen, I thought we would talk a little bit about, now that we're getting through, we're at, personal insight question number 4, talking about the differences and the distinctions. So I don't know if you wanted to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so in the next couple of upcoming webinars, we're going to talk about UC5 and then UC6. Both of those might seem a little overlapping with the UC4. The UC4 has the educational opportunity half, and then the UC6 asks students to talk about an academic subject that inspires them. So those could both be used to talk about an academic course or an academic opportunity. So you want to make sure that you're not repeating yourself across those 2. There are some situations where you might want to do the UC6 in addition to the UC4, and we'll talk about that when we get to the UC6. Mm-hmm. And then the UC5 asks about a challenge that impacted a student academically. So the UC4 asks about overcoming an educational barrier. UC5 asks about a challenge that impacts you academically. Again, you don't want to talk about the same situation or the same, event in both of those.
Right, exactly. And in general, you really want to map out your responses. So not every response is a challenge response, and not every response is an academic response. So it's basically, sorting through all the stuff you're bringing to your application, picking the 4 best for UC, the 4 best pieces, but making sure there's extra, there's the human side of you, there's the academic side of you, there's the person overcoming a challenge, there's the person being gracious to others, so that there's this variety that you're offering. And then of course you do have additional information. So if out of the 4, there's still some extra stuff you need to get out that otherwise people wouldn't know, okay, put that there. And of course you might wonder, how do I start to figure this out? How do I figure out which essays I should be writing on? Well, my response basically is going to be, however you do this, create a page, create a doc for every single one. Just feel really open and curious about every single prompt. And bullet points, notes, however you spontaneously respond to that, respond to each prompt and then see where you've written the most. And that will probably start to give you answers, right? So that you can put it on a whiteboard, you can pin them up on the wall. So definitely start to see it as a sort of a mapping exercise, and just, it's in free writing and just getting out what you have for each one until you can't anymore. There are 8 questions, and every student always has enough material to write on for sure. So we have one question here is, must educational opportunity be academic? Can it have a service learning aspect to it? So I think you can, internships, volunteering, all of that is meant for you to be learning. So yeah, it doesn't not have to be a formal academic experience. So like I said, it could even be a friendship. So we have a student, it's really important for his family that he talk with older people, that he have intergenerational friendships. He's also interested in history himself. So it's possible that you know, that, you know, he has a special friendship and he learns a lot from this person. And I would see that as a totally valid way to approach that question for sure. Yeah. Other questions? We don't really have any other curiosities, other questions, other thoughts we have on this one? We had another, we had another essay that we, which one did we not talk about, Helen?
The student who, this is a sort of an academic, but as opposed to the student A, we gave you an example of somebody who took advantage of a pre-organized formal academic summer program. This student was wrestling sort of with a career in pre-law, but not particularly enthusiastically. And she read a book that we recommended to her, which was called The Tangled Wing, which is sort of an explanation of human behavior utilizing multiple disciplines like neuroscience and psychology and anthropology. She became really interested in anthropology. She wrote letters to Bay Area anthropology professors about a potential internship, and she actually ended up working with an anthropology professor on a particular subfield of anthropology that she became really interested in. She sort of started out as kind of a clerical data entry person, and then ended up being almost a TA, really. And she actually ended up writing a paper and presenting it at a national anthropology conference. Totally changed her life, this educational opportunity that she, initiated and created for herself. And she ended up going to Columbia to major in anthropology. And that was a field she never would have thought she would have pursued until she, followed through this chain of events of reading this book and then, figuring out how to create her own educational opportunity for herself. So.
And I want to mention that this all took place the summer before she applied, the summer after 11th grade. And so we met her to help her plan her summer. And, again, the work that we do is sort of listening to students, and we see they might feel they've got some things in one area, but they're really not that interested in it. We'll help them switch. And so here's a really good example of a student who switched in 11th grade and did very, very, very well in admissions. Of course, she had very good grades, but you don't have to have that one consistent story. Like admissions officers understand that teens, that the nature of a teen is to be evolving and changing, And I also remember, she was just blown away that summer. It was so fun to witness this really like blossoming, and she almost had like her first, like almost advanced undergraduate experience before she started college. So this was a really excellent place for her to tell that story. So yeah, it's a good one. That's a good one. So okay, well, maybe we've okay. What if the educational opportunity expand many years? Sure. Last week we were talking about talent or skill and like sports. Of course, sports can be very sports can lend themselves to being very educational experiences, very educational. So you could, maybe you work with a coach for 10 years. And, there was just that being a coach, I appreciate that coaches can have a lot of wisdom, again. So yeah, maybe there's that, and the various ways in which you've learned about life and you've learned about the game and how they've, intertwined with one another. I'm just doing my thing here and just coming up with ways that you might want to tell a story like that. So, but yeah, over many years, it could. So again, it's sort of like basically each teen has to like put all their stuff out there in the free write questionnaire, or, if you're just applying to UCs, then get your topics up and just dump your stuff in. No judgment, just put everything in. So another solid gold tip: you want to write more, you want to consider more. It's easier to take away than to add later. once you're revising. So really, never worry about word count. We forgot to tell that. Well, we forgot to add that to the general ones. Never worry about word count. Cutting things down is easy.
Mhm.
Building it up, much harder. So you want to do, as Helen mentioned last week, the low stakes writing, voluminous, volumes, and then you cut back. It's so much less stressful. Oh. Okay, well, I think we've exhausted personal insight question 4. And next week, we're working on question 5. Week after that, question 6, and an extra bonus webinar on Sunday. I'm going to get you a different URL for that. So I'm working on that, and I will send the stuff out. So I hope this was really helpful for you guys. And I want to wish everyone a great rest of the weekend, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Helen.
Yep.